Exclusive interview with billionaire philanthropist Melinda French Gates. Last May, French Gates and Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates stunned the world when they announced that they were ending their 27-year marriage.
For 27 years, Melinda Gates stood beside one of the most powerful men in the world, building a family, a fortune, and a global legacy.
Well, the divorce is definitely a sad thing. I have responsibility for causing a lot of pain to my family.
But behind that seemingly unshakable marriage, something was quietly breaking. Now, at 61, Melinda has opened up about the painful events that convinced her their relationship could not continue.
It's not one thing, it was many things. But I did not like that he'd had meetings with Jeffrey Epstein. He was evil personified. I had nightmares about it afterward.
What did Bill do that made divorce inevitable? And why did it take years for the full story to emerge? Stay with us as we uncover what happened behind closed doors. How Bill and Melinda became the world's power couple. Before their divorce became one of the most closely watched breakups in the world, Bill and Melinda Gates appeared to have built something almost impossible to break. Their story began in 1987, when Bill was already a rising force in technology and Microsoft was rapidly expanding. At a company sales meeting in New York, he met Melinda French, a 23-year-old product manager whose intelligence and confidence immediately caught his attention. Bill eventually asked her out, but his first attempt did not go exactly as planned. He proposed a date nearly 2 weeks in advance, approaching romance with the same careful organization he brought to business. Melinda turned him down, suggesting that if he really wanted to take her out, he should try being more spontaneous. Bill apparently took that challenge literally. Later that evening, he called again and asked if going out that same night would qualify. It did. That unexpected beginning grew into a relationship that lasted 6 years before Bill proposed in 1993. On New Year's Day in 1994, the couple married in Hawaii in an extraordinarily private ceremony. Bill went to remarkable lengths to keep the wedding away from the press, reportedly reserving an entire 250-room hotel and hiring every helicopter on a nearby island so photographers could not capture the celebration from above. Around 130 friends and relatives attended, including Warren Buffett. Over the years, their private life expanded into a family of 5. They welcomed 3 children, Jennifer, Rory, and Phoebe, while also building an extraordinary philanthropic partnership through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Together, they committed tens of billions of dollars toward global health, poverty reduction, education, and other causes around the world. Their public image seemed almost flawless. Bill was the legendary technology entrepreneur, while Melinda became known as a thoughtful philanthropist and influential leader in her own right. They appeared together at major events, met world leaders, spoke about global issues, and became one of the most recognizable couples in philanthropy. Even their enormous home in Medina, Washington, seemed to reflect the scale of their success, featuring 24 bathrooms, an underwater music system in its swimming pool, and a domed library. From the outside, there was little reason to believe this extraordinary partnership could collapse. But behind the wealth, influence, and carefully maintained public image, problems were beginning to emerge. And years later, one particular encounter would become impossible for Melinda to forget. It began with a dinner in Manhattan involving a man whose name would eventually become central to the collapse of their trust. The Epstein dinner that changed Melinda's marriage forever. By 2013, Bill and Melinda Gates had spent nearly 2 decades building a life together. But that year, a dinner in Manhattan would expose a serious divide between them, one that Melinda would remember long after the evening was over. The gathering took place at Jeffrey Epstein's townhouse in New York. Epstein was already a deeply controversial figure, having pleaded guilty in 2008 to charges involving solicitation of prostitution and a minor. Melinda later said she wanted to meet him herself and understand who this man was. Instead, the encounter left her profoundly disturbed. According to Melinda, she regretted the meeting almost immediately. She later described Epstein in extremely harsh terms and said the experience was so unsettling that she had nightmares afterward. More importantly, she did not want her husband maintaining a relationship with him. Melinda made her position clear to Bill. She objected to his association with Epstein and expected him to understand why she considered the relationship unacceptable. At that point, the issue might have remained a private disagreement between husband and wife. But Bill continued meeting with Epstein. Later reporting documented multiple interactions between the two men, including meetings that took place after Melinda had already expressed her concerns. A 2019 New York Times investigation brought renewed attention to the relationship, detailing Bill's meetings with Epstein and highlighting the fact that their interactions continued despite Epstein's criminal history. Reports at the time suggested that some of the conversations were connected to philanthropy and the possibility of attracting wealthy donors to charitable causes. For Melinda, however, the explanation did not erase the damage. The issue had become larger than one uncomfortable dinner or one controversial acquaintance. She had made her feelings known, yet Bill continued to engage with someone she deeply distrusted. That realization struck at something far more fragile than reputation: trust. And when the details of those meetings became public years later, the emotional impact became impossible to separate from the problems already developing inside their marriage. Melinda would later make clear that Epstein was one of several painful issues that contributed to the breakdown of their relationship rather than the sole cause. But the Epstein connection was only the beginning. As questions surrounding Bill's personal conduct and relationships with women began surfacing, the story became considerably more complicated. Suddenly, the issue was no longer just about one man Bill had chosen to meet. It was about whether there were other secrets inside the marriage that Melinda had been carrying for years. The secrets Melinda could no longer ignore. The Epstein controversy had already placed enormous pressure on Bill Gates and Melinda's marriage. But as more details about Bill's personal conduct began to surface, another set of questions emerged. This time, they were not about a powerful acquaintance or a controversial dinner. They were about Bill's behavior toward women and what may have happened within the world he had built at Microsoft. One of the most closely watched revelations involved a female Microsoft engineer who reportedly wrote a letter in 2019 alleging that she had been involved in an intimate relationship with Bill around 2000. If true, the timing would have been significant. Bill and Melinda had already been married for several years and were raising their young family. The allegation remained private for years before eventually becoming known publicly. Microsoft took the matter seriously enough to launch an investigation through an outside law firm. Bill, meanwhile, stepped down from Microsoft's board in 2020 while that investigation was underway. His departure generated intense speculation, although the company did not publicly establish that his resignation was a direct result of the investigation. Then came reports of other encounters involving female employees. One reported incident dated back to 2006, when Bill allegedly sent a female employee an email asking her to dinner after attending a presentation. Another report described an alleged unwanted advance toward a woman at an event associated with the Gates Foundation. These accounts were discussed separately, and they carried different allegations and circumstances, but together they added another layer to the questions surrounding Bill's conduct. For Melinda, the issue was not simply how outsiders interpreted these stories. It was what they meant inside a marriage that had already been strained by questions of honesty, trust, and emotional distance. The growing attention placed additional pressure on a relationship that was already beginning to unravel behind the scenes. That became particularly clear when Melinda was asked whether there had been more than one affair during their marriage. Instead of offering a detailed defense of Bill or attempting to explain away the allegations, she paused before carefully distancing herself from the question. She ultimately indicated that those were questions Bill needed to answer himself. Her response revealed how deeply complicated the situation had become, while leaving many details of their private relationship unanswered. It was only a brief response, but it spoke volumes to the public. For years, Melinda had stood beside Bill at major events and helped build the foundation that became central to their shared public identity. Now, she appeared increasingly unwilling to speak for him when the questions concerned his private choices. Still, the allegations and reports alone do not tell the entire story of why the marriage ended. The deeper impact can be understood only by looking at what those years were doing to Melinda personally. Behind the polished appearances, the foundation work, and the enormous wealth, was someone struggling with an increasingly painful reality. She had spent decades building a life that seemed enviable from the outside, yet privately, she was reaching a point where even that extraordinary life could no longer shield her from what she was feeling. And eventually, the emotional cost became impossible to ignore. The woman who appeared composed in front of the cameras was about to reach the moment when she would have to make the most difficult decision of her life. When Bill's billions couldn't save the marriage. From the outside, Melinda Gates was living a life most people could only imagine. There was immense wealth, a sprawling mansion, global influence, and the ability to make a difference on a scale few people ever experience. Yet none of those things could protect her from what was happening privately. Behind the walls of the Gates estate, Melinda was struggling emotionally. She later revealed that she experienced severe panic attacks, with her heart racing so intensely that she sometimes feared something was physically wrong. There were also moments when the emotional pressure became overwhelming. She described lying face down on the carpet and crying, confronting a reality that money, status, and success could not fix. What made the situation even more difficult was that life continued as normal in public. Melinda still had meetings to attend. There were charitable initiatives to oversee, public appearances to make, and a global organization carrying both their names. Cameras continued capturing the couple as influential philanthropists, while privately, the marriage was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. For Melinda, this was not simply the loss of a relationship. She was confronting the possible collapse of a life she had spent decades building. She had met Bill when she was young, married him, raised 3 children with him, and helped create a philanthropic partnership that became one of the most recognizable in the world. Walking away meant leaving behind far more than a husband. By early 2020, however, Melinda reached a point where she could no longer continue pretending everything was fine. She told Bill that she wanted their marriage to end. According to accounts she later shared, Bill was sad when she made the decision. But the public would not hear about it immediately. Instead, the couple entered an unusual period of separation that remained largely invisible to the outside world. Even after deciding their marriage was over, Bill and Melinda continued living under the same roof for more than a year. They also continued working together at their foundation, while lawyers quietly handled the complicated process of separating their personal and financial lives. To anyone watching from the outside, almost nothing seemed different. But behind closed doors, one of the world's most powerful marriages was already coming to an end. Then, on May 3, 2021, the secret became public. Bill and Melinda announced that after 27 years of marriage, they had decided to divorce. The announcement transformed a private family crisis into a global story, raising immediate questions about what had gone wrong, their 3 children, and how their enormous shared fortune would be divided. But the billions involved in the settlement were only part of what Melinda was walking away from. For the first time in decades, she was preparing to build a life that belonged entirely to her. The billion-dollar divorce was only the beginning. When Bill and Melinda Gates announced their divorce on May 3, 2021, the world immediately focused on the enormous fortune they had accumulated during their 27 years together. Their separation was not simply the breakup of a famous marriage. It involved one of the most closely watched families in the world and an immense collection of investments, properties, and other assets. The financial separation began quickly. On the day the divorce announcement was made, Bill transferred billions of dollars in stock to Melinda. Additional assets were divided as the process continued, although the exact terms of their private marital agreement were not publicly disclosed. What was clear was that the end of their marriage involved a financial restructuring on a scale few divorces could ever approach. But for Melinda, money was never the real destination. After spending decades building a life around family, philanthropy, and a shared public identity, she now had the opportunity to decide what came next, without defining herself through her marriage to Bill Gates. That transformation became increasingly visible over the following years. Melinda continued developing the work she had already begun independently through Pivotal, the organization she founded in 2015 to advance social progress and expand opportunities for women and families. In 2024, she announced that she would leave the Gates Foundation after more than 2 decades. As part of the agreement surrounding her departure, she said she would receive an additional $12.5 billion to support her own philanthropic work. The move represented more than a change in where her money was going. It marked a decisive separation between Melinda's future and the institution she had spent years building alongside Bill. After decades of working within the Gates Foundation, her priorities were now increasingly shaped by her own vision and the causes she wanted to champion independently. Her focus also became increasingly personal. Through Pivotal, she continued directing resources toward women, families, health, caregiving, economic mobility, and other areas she believed needed greater attention. In 2024 alone, she announced a further $1 billion commitment through 2026, aimed at advancing women's power and supporting women and families around the world. She also returned to using her maiden name, Melinda French Gates, reinforcing an identity that existed long before she became known as Bill Gates' wife. The change reflected a broader transformation, from being defined largely through her marriage and shared philanthropy to establishing a public identity and philanthropic legacy distinctly her own. Then came another important step, telling her own story. Through her memoir, The Next Day, Melinda reflected on the painful transition she had experienced and the process of discovering who she wanted to become afterward. The message was no longer about being the woman who had survived the end of a billionaire marriage. It was about becoming someone who could decide what the next chapter looked like. And that next chapter would contain something many people probably did not expect. After years of heartbreak, public scrutiny, and rebuilding her independence, Melinda was ready to open another door in her personal life. This time, the question wasn't about Bill Gates. It was about whether Melinda French Gates had found love again. After Bill Gates, Melinda found happiness again. For years, Melinda French Gates had been defined in the public imagination by the marriage she once shared with Bill Gates. But after the divorce, she began creating an identity that was entirely her own. And then, almost 4 years after announcing their split, she revealed something that surprised many people. She was in love again. In April 2025, while discussing her memoir, The Next Day, Melinda confirmed that she was dating someone. She did not reveal his name, but her reaction said more than enough. With a smile, she admitted that she was very, very happy and made it clear that she was enjoying this new chapter while keeping the relationship largely private. That privacy only fueled curiosity. Months earlier, Melinda had been photographed holding hands in New York City with technology entrepreneur Philip Vaughn. Vaughn is the founder and chairman of Tavour, a craft beer delivery company, and his professional history contains an interesting connection to Melinda. He previously worked at Microsoft from 1999 to 2008, years after she had begun her own career there. Although Melinda initially declined to publicly identify him as her partner, later reporting identified Vaughn as the man she had been linked to since 2024. But perhaps the most revealing part of Melinda's new relationship was not who she was dating. It was how she now viewed love itself. After experiencing the painful end of a 27-year marriage, she was no longer treating romance as something that needed to be rushed or forced. She had learned to value her independence and genuinely enjoyed spending time alone, while still remaining open to finding someone who could challenge her intellectually, bring energy into her life, and grow alongside her. She even acknowledged that marriage could be possible again if she met the right person at the right time. The difference was that there was no longer any pressure to make it happen. And Bill had also moved forward. He entered a relationship with Paula Hurd, the widow of former Oracle CEO Mark Hurd, and the two eventually appeared together publicly at major events. Their lives had taken separate paths. But for Melinda, perhaps the biggest victory was not finding another partner. It was reaching a place where her happiness no longer depended on being someone's wife. The woman who once faced an uncertain future after the collapse of her marriage was now choosing what came next on her own terms. She had rebuilt her work, reclaimed her identity, embraced independence, and opened herself to love again. And maybe that is the most unexpected ending of all. After everything she went through, Melinda French Gates did not simply move on from her old life. She built a completely new one. What do you think truly made Melinda Gates decide that her marriage could not continue? Was leaving the only choice she had left? Share your thoughts in the comments and watch another video for more stories you won't want to miss.